Hello. Object 18 of my series on the history and philosophy of Summerhill through 100 objects is this. This is the 1999 Ofsted HMI inspection of Summerhill, the report. And it's interesting because as a report it does give a little bit of history of the inspections prior to this, because we found out as a result of a court case that, where the school had to appeal the consequences of this. This report led to Summerhill being threatened with closure, because we basically got a notice of complaint, which is a legal document that basically stated that we had to change 6 different things within the school in order to maintain our position as a registered school and a legal school. And we agreed on 3 of those items. I think one was to do with the condition of the corridors in the top of the house, so fixing the corridors. Another one was to do with Class 2, I think, in terms of ensuring that Class 2 had better provision. And the third one, I can't remember what the third one was now. Anyway, but we agreed on 3, and then we said basically we challenged them on the other 3. And the other 3 were to do with ensuring that our children were either at lessons or doing private study. So that was the first one. And the second one was that our children should be continually assessed and reported on within the school. And thirdly, that the toilets should actually be labelled boys, girls and adults. So those are the 3 that we refused. And because we refused them legally, then we had to go to the Royal Court of Justice. And because we, of our status as a private school, it meant that we had the right to appeal through the Royal Court of Justice, and that as part of this we would have available to our solicitors all the documentations that Ofsted and HMI had created during the inspections of Summerhill. Now, this 1999 inspection we'd been inspected the year before. In fact, by one of the team leader of the year before was someone called Neville Grenier, who was called Father Christmas by some of our students because of his shape. And he appeared quite a humorous guy, and he actually bought one of our t-shirts, which was said probably the most inspected school in the world. Now, that t-shirt was produced because we'd been inspecting nearly every year since the 1990, I think. So for like 10 years, we'd been inspected either every year or every other year. And as a result of this, we were feeling very, very harassed. And we didn't know why we were getting, especially the full inspections, let alone the smaller sort of review inspections. We were getting full inspections with the 1999 report was based on an inspection with I think 8 or 9 inspectors, and we found out that these inspectors, Neville Grenier was one of them as well, but this time he wasn't. We weren't sure whether he was the team leader, because we discovered that Neville Grenier, I think at the time, was inspector in charge of the inspection of secondary schools. I think private secondary schools. I think that was Neville Grenier. And then Chris, let me have a look. Another member of the team, who I can't remember his name now, but he inspected me. I'll try and remember his name. I think his name was Chris something. He was actually in charge of overall inspection of all secondary schools in the whole country. So he was the manager, I presume, of Neville Grenier. Anyway, so we had an incredibly well-qualified team. They weren't just sort of Ofsted inspectors, who normally actually are sort of private, and they sort of contract into inspecting different schools. So the Ofsted might advertise a school needing inspection, and then you get Ofsted inspectors, freelancers, who would then submit applications to inspect their school. And that's the general process. But with Summerhill it was different. We had HMIs, Her Majesty's Inspectorate, who are sort of management and oversee the whole system and things. Cliff Gould, yeah. The other guy was Cliff Gould, who was in charge of secondary school inspection for the country. And he was the science inspector here, and I just want a personal dig at Cliff, because he arrived late. I think it was a day or a day and a half late. When he was inspecting me in my science lessons, he also had his phone on, and he had to leave my science lessons because he was also one of the HMI who was responsible for a report that was published at the beginning of that week, looking at racism and in schools and the achievement of students who were black. And he kept on having to answer his phone in terms of responding either to the press or to his own office about inquiries about that report. So he wasn't a particularly good inspector. And I mean, you'll see that in terms of some of the comments in the report are totally inaccurate, partly because he wrote them. Especially there's one example in the report where they talk about the Japanese students not being fully integrated within the community, which was totally false. It was just that I had just finished my teaching and Cliff had been watching me, and I was running to an event, and I asked him where he was going, and he told me he was off to meet the other inspectors. And he said, "Where are you going?" And I said, "Well, I'm going up to the cafe there. You can join me if you like. I'm going up there because I'm going to see the Japanese kids, because the English teacher who teaches them has an issue. She thinks that they I think it was the English teacher. It was either the English or Japanese teacher. I can't remember. They had issues that they thought that the children weren't talking enough in the meetings, and therefore, because of their English and their understanding. So, and I said, "You're welcome to come up," and he didn't come up. And I went up to the meeting, and I was there before the teacher, and I chatted to all the Japanese kids that were there, who I knew really well, and they didn't know why the meeting was called. I said, "Well, it's called because your teacher says that she thinks you're not taking part in the meetings because you don't understand the language." And they all said, "No, we fully understand the language. We would speak if we wanted to. We're very confident, and there isn't any issue." And they were quite surprised at their teacher's opinion, and they were very surprised at having the meeting. So and then the teacher came, and I explained, and they explained to the teacher, and she was satisfied, and that was the end of the meeting. So the meeting actually decided, because from the viewpoint of the kids, there was no problem with the integration of the Japanese kids. Yet in this report, because Cliff Gould had heard, because he made a note, after he left me, and he didn't go to the meeting. He in this report it says that the Japanese kids have a problem with integrating, and that there are measures that the school is making in order to. Here it says, "The Japanese pupils in the school are, as a group, less well integrated than others, though steps have recently been taken to enable their concerns to be addressed properly in the public meetings." What a load of rubbish! Yeah, the children had no concerns, and there was no issue of their lack of integration. There was one teacher who had that issue and felt that's what the Japanese kids felt, and maybe she expressed that to the inspectors separately. But all I know is I expressed it to Cliff Gould what the meeting was. I invited him to the meeting. He didn't come, and then he tries to sort of pad out this report with as if he went to the meeting, and as if there was evidence of the Japanese kids not being part of it. This reflects the quality of the report overall, in fact, because like another example is with that when I did an analysis of their attendance and inspection of our lessons, and I found that at least 5 lessons it was very problematic in terms of the way they assessed it, because they assessed it as if they were normal classroom lessons with 25 students. And one lesson, the teacher had taken the students down to the local village library, so the classroom was empty. So failed lesson, because the inspector came to the classroom, it was empty, therefore it was a failed lesson. So that went down as bad teaching. If it's a failed lesson, it's bad teaching. Yeah, and that was one example of at least 5 or 6 that I found, which significantly affected the statistics of what was an excellent lesson, a good lesson, or a bad lesson, or a failed lesson. Yeah. But one of the things about this report is, apart from this, is the fact that the year before, when Neville Grenier, Father Christmas, was inspecting us, we'd already had letters. Every review report, so not a full inspection, but a review report, we would get a letter, sort of, which, well, we wouldn't get it. It was a private letter, specifically to the principal, and in a sense, she could share it with us. But then, because I responded to one of these letters, and I was told in the reply that I shouldn't have had access to the private letter, and I wrote back saying that I had full permission from my head teacher to quote the letter in terms of correspondence with the FE and HMI and Ofsted. But yeah, so we'd had a series of letters, and one of those letters, I think early on in 1995-96, was to do with creating a 3-year plan. So we set up sort of working groups and of teachers, and it was quite an interesting period, because the teachers hadn't had real working groups to discuss things like policies. We had staff meetings which were incredibly open and incredibly open in terms of what we discuss and how we discuss it, and it's very democratic or consensus-based as staff meetings. But these were meetings specifically looking at policy and policy statements, and also in terms of planning, thinking about what we could look at in terms of improving the school, and in terms of a 3-year plan. So I helped create the working group, and we got every single teacher to write down their assessment of the issues at Summerhill now, then, and also we created overall, from a brainstorm in the first meeting, we created a policy document that then went round all the staff to see what their response would be, and if they would add things or take things away and things like that. I mean, it's interesting because a number of the staff actually did change statements from the brainstorming, and in fact they changed them in such a way that they were odds with the philosophy and values of the school. One example would be the concept of progress, and to do with literacy and numeracy. And I think 2 of the staff said that the school should ensure that the younger children progress within literacy and numeracy. Now that would, if that was a policy within Summerhill, then that would be an interventionist policy that was in which we would have to impose on the children concepts of how we measure improvement, how we measure literacy and numeracy, and the fact that we measure it, and that we couldn't, as a policy, it wouldn't allow us to allow the children a choice of whether they're assessed or not, and whether they go to lessons or not. Yeah? And it would mean, in a sense, that the whole sort of structures and things, life of Summerhill, would, in a sense, could be defined within that policy of literacy and numeracy. That we would have to look at our notice boards, we'd have to look at our meetings, we'd have to look at the way we communicated with the students and children and their life, and how could we integrate the learning of numeracy deliberately into the life, landscape and culture of Summerhill. It's something we didn't want to do. I mean, literacy and numeracy are integrated everywhere in terms of life normally, in terms of the fact that we all live in communities that are based on literacy and numeracy. So, but when it then becomes a policy which then defines what adults and teachers should do within that landscape, then you can imagine that it would arise great hypocrisy, and a question of of how the adults behave. If you come across a wall that has posters in it specifically designed to increase literacy, instead of just posters that are up there because we're sharing an event or sharing a report about something that's happening in the school, there's a very different attitude of the adults towards that, though the children wouldn't know. And in a sense, the environment becomes a manipulative one that is defined by targets set by adults. Now, I'm discussing all of this because this is partly what the whole inspection process is about. And in the 3-year plan, I went to every meeting to do with the 3-year plan. We had an advisory group that was not just the staff, it was about 3 of the staff, and an actual HMI who was local to Suffolk, that was a friend of one of our teachers. He was they were sort of musicians together in a band, and then there was another person who was an outside. I can't remember who was on it now, but anyway, it was a very, very well qualified group of people, including this HMI and others. And the 3-year plan had to have objectives, aims, and to do with assessment, numeracy, literacy, and reporting. And I kept on telling the group, because they wanted progress in that. They kept on trying to get the word progress, and I said, well, as soon as you put progress in, what happens to my students that I teach science if I'm doing it modular, which I was at the time, and a student's done 2 or 3 modules one term, in terms of light and astronomy and gravity, and in terms of sort of electricity and circuits, and then the next time they do nothing in science. How can I call that progress the following term, and how do I report it, and what is the assessment made at the end of that term if they haven't come to science? And I said the whole point of some is that that's a positive choice, it's not a negative, and yet as soon as you say progress in science, then it's a problem with a school based on choice. It's a problem with a school based on children controlling their own learning. It's a problem when the idea is that children control their own sense of success. If we've got to have this concept of progress within our 3-year plan, and then that plan defines the actions and policies that we create from it. Now, as a result of this, because I had to keep on doing it again and again and again, I kept on saying the opportunity to, instead of in terms of progress, it was the opportunity to study science, not to progress in it. The opportunity to develop English. The opportunity to, you could say the opportunity to progress. You could use that, but it was the opportunity. It wasn't the fact that it was compulsion that you had to. The expectation was that you would progress, because we progress in everything every day. But why should, as adults, no one measures us, do they? And why should we measure them as children, unless we're helping them to gain an exam or gain a skill, a craft and things that they will then need to do very well in order to get a job or in order to get an exam and a certificate. But that group had a very negative image of me, or 1 or 2 of them did, especially the HMI. They thought that I was against progress itself, and that I was against, and as a science teacher, in a sense, they thought I was against the teaching of science, which was far from the object of what I was doing. Anyway, so getting back to this report, we thought we were ready for this inspection. We didn't know why it was happening. We didn't know why the inspection had happened the year before. There were guesses, because we inspected 7 or 8 times during the last 10 years. There were guesses that the recent inspections might have been to do with a parent who hadn't supported the school. Maybe they were a partner, then their partner had wanted the children to be there, but this parent didn't, and that was having problems with the school, and therefore we thought maybe a parent had complained, and that complaint had resulted in a flag of warning to either social services or to HMI, and that the inspection. So we were trying to guess, and despite the fact that Zoe, I think, and various members of staff and the parent had written to HMI asking why. Why were we being inspected every year when most schools at the time were inspected every 5 to 7 years? So we thought we were being bullied, and in fact, later, when I chat about the court case, you'll find that at the court case they discovered that we were on a special list, which is to be watched list, TBW, to be watched list, and that the school had been on the list for 10 years and didn't know. And the to be watched list of schools that were on the edge of failing. They thought we failed every inspection because of the choice of lessons, and yet they were unwilling to say this. They were unwilling to actually confront our philosophy. So they put it in such words that we could respond to, in terms of 3-year plans, in terms of increasing our offers, in terms of assessing within the lessons. But their whole issue was the students not going, and we thought, well, we kept on saying, well, it's not an issue. And in this, it actually says at the very beginning, in a sense, it's not quite true what it says, but it says at the beginning of this report, HMI has had significant concerns about the school for a number of years. It has been regularly inspected over the past decade, nearly every year. Full inspections of the school were carried out in May 1990 and June 1993. The Department for Education and Employment issued a notice of complaint after the first of these inspections. A notice of complaint was what was issued with this as well. It's when you state you have to make these changes legally or we close you. So they'd given us a notice of complaint in 1990, and then we responded such that they withdrew it. So we acted on that. We didn't go to court. But that was lifted when it appeared the school intended to take action on each of the key weaknesses that had been identified. So this was actually before I started working at Summerhill. Subsequent monitoring visits by HMI indicated that planned actions were not generally being implemented, leading to the second full inspection in June 1993. Since then, the pattern has been repeated of strongly critical inspection findings being followed by promising actions or plans that were only very partially, if at all, implemented by the school. That's because we did everything we could, but changed the status of choice of lessons, whether you go to lessons or not. And we didn't, like some other schools, you might have contracts and negotiated in terms of what the students do each day. But we don't even do that. We have a sign up where the children sign at the beginning of the term so that they can have the option of going to their lessons. They have the opportunity. I can sign up for science, maths and music. That means that I, as a student, I would have those lessons on my timetable, but there's no compulsion to go to those lessons or persuasion or, and it says marketing. It's just that the students are informed of those lessons. So that's what they wanted somehow to get us to do compulsory lessons, and they couldn't. And it was in this inspection then that they finally addressed that issue. And there was a complaint finally in 1999 said you must. They changed it. I think Ofsted wanted compulsory lessons, and the Department for Education, who can rewrite these things, rewrote it as the children have to attend lessons or be doing private studies, because they were aware of the fact that it was in total conflict with the issues of the school. There are many other stories I could tell about this, but I think I'm going on a bit, and so I might actually cover some more stories to do with what happened during the inspection with Cliff Gould and with the plan, and what happened with the feedback when Zoe burst into tears when I was with her in the feedback session, where after the inspection they reported what the actions might be. They weren't certain, and those actions they referenced were those that were in the notice of complaint, and therefore and Zoe said to them, because there was a bust, a very famous artistic bust sculpture of Neil on the bookcase behind us watching the meeting, she said, you know, what would he say if he heard these inspectors threatening to close a school that he'd founded and that was his whole life. Anyway, thank you very much. So this is Object 18, and it's the Ofsted Inspection 1999 report. Thank you.